By the time I was somewhere east of Miles City, I had already decided I was either being stupid or overreacting. And when you drive nights for a living, those are basically the two settings you live in. The bus was doing that steady, deep hum it gets once you're up to highway speed. Not loud exactly, just always there under everything, under the heater fans, under somebody coughing in the back, under the little rattle in the panel over row 4 that maintenance kept promising they'd fix next service. We had 9 passengers on board that run, which in a snow week out west wasn't unusual. Half the state had weather alerts going. People cancel, roads close, somebody's cousin decides they'd rather wait a day than slide sideways into a ditch outside Medora. That's just winter work. What got me wasn't even anything dramatic at first. It was that when I checked the mirror, the man in seat 17C was wearing a brown jacket. An hour earlier it had been black. I know how that sounds. People bring layers. People swap hoodies. People dig stuff out of bags. But he didn't have a bag. I would have noticed. On an overnight route that light, you notice what comes on board. He had gloves, a knit cap, and one of those faces that somehow looked both tired and alert at the same time. He also had a habit of asking questions right after I got the wheels straight out of a stop, like he'd been waiting for the exact moment I needed to split my attention. How often do they switch your route unexpectedly? That was the first thing he asked me leaving Fargo. Not where we'd hit weather, not whether we'd be late into Billings, not if we were stopping long enough for coffee anywhere decent, which is what normal people ask. That. I told him what I tell anybody. Dispatch can reroute us for road conditions, closures, breakdown support, whatever they need. Doesn't happen much unless the weather gets cute. He nodded like that answer mattered more than it should have. Then he sat back down and watched the front window for about 3 straight hours without sleeping once. Now anybody who drives overnights is probably already ahead of me here. Passengers fall asleep in shifts. They droop into the aisle, they snore, they wake up mad at their own necks. The ones who stay awake all night are usually nervous flyers who took a bus instead, people detoxing off something, or people with nowhere to be comfortable. You learn not to read too much into it. Still, I kept checking the mirror. I drive the Fargo to Billings overnight run a lot in winter. Routine route, sparse traffic, long dead stretches where your headlights feel like they're not reaching anything real. Isolated gas stations standing out there by themselves like somebody dropped them off by mistake. You get used to the smell of the coach after midnight too. Stale coffee from the thermos I shouldn't still be using. Vinyl seats warmed and cooled 1,000 times, wet winter jackets steaming a little near the floor heaters. I keep a jar of peppermints beside the steering wheel, old habit now. My daughter used to hand them to passengers when she was younger and riding along with me in the summers. She'd grin like she was running customer service for the entire Midwest. She left for college a couple years back and the jar just stayed there. I still top it off before every run. That night I'd brought the ugly blue thermos with the dent in the side, the one that leaks if you don't tighten it exactly right. I had my route binder clipped open to the weather printout, my reading glasses shoved up on my head because I never remember where else I put them, and I was wearing my old insulated work vest over a flannel because the driver's area on that bus always ran 10 degrees colder than the cabin. Normal night, normal prep, 9 passengers and a long road, 17C boarded without doing anything memorable, which in hindsight is memorable all by itself. No luggage tag, no fuss, ticket on his phone. Gloves never came off, even inside the terminal. I noticed that, but people are strange about germs now, and I don't argue with harmless strange. The first stop where it really registered was outside Glendive. Small place, half-lit, coffee that tastes like hot coins, restroom key attached to a block of wood big enough to anchor a boat. I parked, made the announcement, told everyone 15 minutes and no. We couldn't wait if they wandered off looking for scratch-offs. Standard stuff. Most of them got off. One older guy stayed asleep with his mouth open. A woman from the rear, late 30s maybe, left her scarf on the seat and hurried into the restroom building like she didn't want to waste a second. 17C got off too. When they came back on, the man was wearing a green field jacket. Again, no bag. I actually looked down the aisle twice because I thought maybe I was mixing him up with another rider, but we had 9 people. This wasn't a holiday charter. You can memorize a group of 9 without trying. Same cap, same gloves, different jacket. I remember thinking maybe he'd bought thrift layers and was doubling up against the cold. People do weird practical things when money is tight. I gave it that explanation and kept moving. Then I started seeing peppermint wrappers around his seat. That part bugged me more than it should have. Little red and white twisted wrappers tucked near the base of the seat leg and one on the armrest. I never saw him come up front, never heard the jar lid. But there they were, piling up beside 17C like he'd been eating them by the handful. I took a quick count once everyone was back on because that's procedure after a stop. I got 10. I counted again and got 9. I told myself I was just tired. The woman from the back came forward maybe 10 minutes later in her socks, carrying her boots by the heels, and asked me in this low, embarrassed voice if somebody had been allowed back on while she was inside. I said no, everybody had reboarded from the stop. She looked over her shoulder, then leaned closer. She said when she came back from the restroom she'd found somebody sitting in her seat. Not sitting near it. In it. By the window facing forward. She said the bus had looked empty when she climbed the steps, but when she got halfway down the aisle there was suddenly just a person there. And then by the time she'd set her purse down, the seat was empty again. I asked if maybe one of the other passengers had moved around while she was off the bus. She said no, and the way she said it made me wish I hadn't answered so quickly. Now, I had reasons not to light the whole cabin up over that. It was late. People were tired. The lighting in those coaches at night is dim by design and kind of yellow in a way that makes everybody look like they died a little 2 days earlier. She could have been mixed up. Anybody could. So I told her maybe somebody sat down by mistake and moved when they saw her things. She nodded like she was accepting that because it was the available option, not because she believed it. I kept checking the mirror. 17C was looking out the window and unwrapping another peppermint I never saw him take. A couple hours later, the road got uglier. Light snow. Nothing dramatic, just that fine drifting stuff that erases the edges of the lanes if you stop respecting it. I remember thinking I'd like to make Miles City on time and then go home and sleep until next Tuesday. I also remember hearing one sharp pound from the onboard restroom door. Then another. At first I figured somebody had lost their footing. That happens. You've got a moving bus, icy roads, cramped space, some poor soul trying to button winter layers one-handed in a bathroom the size of a broom closet. Then the pounding came again, fast this time. Not someone stumbling, someone hitting the door. I called back, asked if everything was all right. No answer. A man from row 11 looked over the seat at me. I told him stay seated. I eased the bus steady, checked the shoulder, didn't like it. Too narrow, too icy, no service out there, no lights for a long way. And this is the part I still don't enjoy admitting. I didn't stop immediately. I told myself if I braked hard on that shoulder with sleeping passengers and slick pavement, I could create a whole different emergency based on nothing but my own nerves. I told myself get to a safer pull-off, keep the bus stable. Don't panic people over a bathroom situation you haven't even confirmed. All of that sounded responsible in my head. It also let me keep driving another couple minutes after my gut had already left the room. When I finally got a stretch wide enough, I set the brake, stood up, and told everybody to stay where they were. The bus had gone very quiet by then. Even the engine felt louder because nobody was talking over it. I walked back and the restroom door was unlatched. Inside there was blood on the sink, not sprayed everywhere, not some movie scene, just smeared across the edge and on the faucet like somebody with a bleeding hand had steadied themselves, and on the floor there was a black jacket crumpled up against the toilet base. The same black jacket 17C had been wearing out of Fargo. I just stood there for a second staring at it because my brain did that stupid slow thing where it tries the easy answer one more time. Nosebleed. Cut hand. Somebody changed clothes for some reason that makes sense if I wait long enough. Then from behind me, calm as anything, a voice said, "You need me to clear the aisle." It was him. He was standing 3 rows back wearing a gray zip hoodie under that green field jacket. Same cap. Same gloves. Looking at me like he'd come up on a driver taking too long with a maintenance latch. I don't know if my face changed or what, but he gave me this tiny polite smile and moved sideways so one of the passengers could squeeze past. And that was the moment the night stopped being explainable. I went back to the front, picked up the radio mic, and got dispatch. Kept my voice level, told them I needed highway patrol at Intercept and I needed them to verify one passenger manifest against station footage if they could. I gave them the seat and whatever description I had that wasn't useless. Male, medium build, gloves still on indoors, currently on his 3rd jacket of the evening. Which even saying it out loud sounded insane. Dispatch came back after too long and said the ID tied to that boarding record didn't match station footage, because the station footage didn't show anybody entering the terminal under that image at all. They checked the outer doors, the bay doors, lobby angle, and nothing. No clean visual of the man I was describing. No terminal scan besides the digital ticket being pulled. I asked them to repeat it because sometimes on those radios you think you heard something weird when what you really heard was static and exhaustion. Before they could, he was at the front. Not rushed, just walking slowly up the aisle while everybody else suddenly got very interested in pretending to sleep. He leaned one arm on the first seat and asked me, real quiet, whether the next stop had state police or just local deputies. I think I said something automatic like, "Depends on the stop." I don't even remember. What I do remember is how deliberate he was. He wasn't guessing. He'd seen me call something in. He knew we were past normal. Dispatch was still in my ear. I told them as evenly as I could that I'd be bypassing the planned exit due to road conditions. That was the phrase we landed on. Road conditions. Meaning I was going to miss the stop on purpose and keep this man on the bus until patrol could meet us where they wanted. He looked at the sign for the exit, looked at me, and I knew he knew. He didn't lunge, didn't shout. Honestly, that would have been easier. He just stood there near the front and held the pole with one gloved hand while the bus rolled past the exit. The woman from the rear had both arms around herself, staring at the floor. One guy near the middle had his phone out under his jacket, probably texting somebody or maybe just pretending there was still a normal world outside that bus. My hands were getting clumsy on the wheel. That's what I noticed first. I kept having to reset my grip. My mouth tasted like old pennies and peppermint. Then the lights hit us from behind. 2 patrol vehicles came up fast and one slid ahead onto the shoulder with its bar going. I pulled over exactly where they wanted. Doors stayed closed until they were in position. One officer came up on my side, another on the passenger door, another farther back with a flashlight angled toward the windows. I opened the door. Everything after that happened fast in the way only trained people can make something fast. Commands, hands visible, step down, turn around. He did all of it almost lazily, like he'd been expecting the inconvenience. Then one of the officers lifted the green jacket after they had him outside and called for another unit. I didn't understand what I'd heard at first. I caught sewn lining and identification and possible evidence. Later at the secured station they told me they found 3 separate IDs hidden in different jacket linings. Stitched in, not just tucked away. Different names, different states. One belonged to a missing man out of South Dakota who'd been reported gone about 2 weeks earlier. And then the whole thing got bigger than my part in it. They escorted us to a secured station and kept me there until sunrise giving statements. I drank the worst vending machine coffee of my life and filled out forms while snow blew sideways across the lot outside. The woman from the rear gave a statement too. So did the other passengers. Nobody had a clean answer for when exactly they first noticed him or whether he'd moved seats or when he'd changed clothes. That's the kind of thing people think they'll remember perfectly, but they don't. A quiet bus at 2 in the morning is like a dream with seat numbers. By the time I got home, my thermos was still half full and the peppermint jar was almost empty. I don't let passengers remain aboard during isolated rest stops anymore. Not for weather, not for complaints, not for anything. Everybody gets off. Everybody reboards where I can see them. If they don't like it, they can file a complaint and spell my name right while they do it. I also still check my mirrors more than I used to whenever somebody changes seats quietly overnight. I hate that. I do it anyway. And I still think about how many rappers were around 17C before I ever saw him come forward once. What I never learned was why he had IDs sewn into different jackets from people who'd gone missing near bus terminals in different states. Story 2. The next one comes from a driver who spent a long time telling himself he wasn't part of it. I used to tell myself I was just the one holding the wheel, which sounds even thinner out loud than it did in my own head. By the end of that job, I had a route binder full of altered manifests, a bus that smelled like hot brakes and bargain bin disinfectant, and 4 apology letters to my ex-wife folded behind the insurance card where I could feel them every time I opened the cover. I never mailed those. Wrote them. Folded them. Carried them around. That's been my style for a lot of things, apparently. This was after my bankruptcy, after the house sold, after I had gotten too old to start over in any clean, heroic way. I needed steady work. Not meaningful work, not dignified work, just work that cleared every week and kept the lights on. A private shuttle outfit out of the El Paso area hired me to run overnights north through New Mexico. Labor transport, cash passengers, occasional contract runs, old charter buses retired by companies with better lawyers. We hauled whoever had a fare and no better option. If you've never been on one of those buses around midnight in summer, it has a smell all its own. Diesel in your clothes before you even turn the key. Overheated brakes after every long, slow descent. Cheap lemon disinfectant fighting a battle it never wins. And always that faint hiss from the suspension lines because something somewhere in the system was damaged in a way management preferred to call manageable. Every bus in that fleet knelt a little on one side like it was tired. The company rule that bothered me from the start was simple. Once a passenger boarded and we departed, drivers were not to ask for additional identification under any circumstances. If dispatch cleared them, that was that. I asked why. They said to keep things moving. I knew better than to keep asking after that. Most nights were boring in the sad way, not the peaceful way. Men heading to temporary jobs. Women traveling light with tired kids. Though not on my later runs because those were mostly cash adults. People with grocery bags instead of luggage. People who paid in folded bills and avoided giving you any detail they didn't absolutely owe. It wasn't my business why. That's what I kept telling myself. The first thing that started bothering me was surnames. You'd get a manifest with 3 riders named Ortega who boarded in different towns and never looked at each other once. 2 Chavezes on separate cash tickets. No listed relation. A Salcedo and another Salcedo 2 nights later with different first names written in the same neat block handwriting. Not every night, but enough that it stopped feeling like coincidence. I assumed clerical mistakes because the dispatch clerks were always rushing. One printer half worked. The office manager smoked by the back door and yelled names at people like she was running bingo in hell. You can get duplicate anything in a place like that. So I gave it that explanation. I had to. If I let myself sit with the other explanation too early, I would have had to quit before I had rent covered. One woman I remember clearly was named Mireya Salcedo. At least that was the name on the ticket. She boarded outside Las Cruces with a small, hard-shell suitcase in a color I can only describe as trying too hard to be cheerful. Yellow, but the kind of yellow cheap luggage manufacturers think will make people feel worldly. She wore white sneakers with the laces gone gray and kept one thumbnail wrapped in a strip of bandage tape, like she'd split it at work. About an hour into the route she came up while I was fueling and asked, very quietly, whether buses ever stopped at places not listed on the tickets. I said sometimes for fuel or roadside issues, but scheduled stops are scheduled stops. She didn't look relieved by that. She just nodded and asked if passengers were always told ahead of time. I said they should be. Anybody listening to me now is probably thinking, there it is, that's the flashing red light. Sure. I hear you. I do. At the time, though, she could have meant anything. Wrong bus before. Transfer confusion. Bad English on the ticket. Fear of being dropped in some town she didn't know. I answered the question that was asked. That was my other talent there. Answering only what was asked. A couple hours later, we made an unscheduled fuel stop out in Socorro County. I didn't choose it. Dispatch sent the instruction through because one of the usual places was closed. Tiny station, bad lighting, one buzzing sign, lot full of drifting sand and wrappers. I went in, paid, came back out. Mireya was gone. Her suitcase was still in the rack. I checked the restroom. Checked beside the building. Asked the cashier if she'd seen a woman in a tan sweater. He shrugged like shrugging was a profession. I called dispatch. They told me to continue driving. Said she had likely transferred to another shuttle and the baggage issue would be handled up line. I said her bag was still on my bus. They said continue driving, and this is the part that's mine. I kept driving. I told myself dispatch had information I didn't. Maybe another company bus had picked her up. Maybe she had family meeting her. Maybe she stepped into the wrong vehicle by choice. Maybe she wanted to disappear. Adults are allowed to make bad decisions. Adults are allowed to leave yellow suitcases behind. The road north was black glass and my hands felt dry and strange on the wheel. I kept waiting for somebody to shout from the rear that they'd seen where she went, that this was simple, that I was making too much of it. Nobody did. Her suitcase rode the rest of the route with me like an accusation. That should have been enough. It wasn't. A supervisor in Albuquerque told me the next afternoon that Mireya had voluntarily transferred and there had been a paperwork mix-up. He said it with the bored confidence of a man who had done this enough times to know the right tone. For about half a day I let myself believe him. Needed to, really. If he was lying, then I had driven away from a missing passenger because a voice on a radio told me to keep schedule. Then I cleaned the bus. Under a seat near the rear I found 3 discarded ticket stubs. Different names. Same handwriting. Same pressure marks in the paper. Heavy on the last name. Lighter on the first, like whoever filled them out got tired halfway through. I laid them side by side on the jump seat and stared at them longer than I want to admit. Around then I started noticing the clock. The onboard clock in those buses was always wrong by a few minutes because everything in those buses was wrong by a few something. But after every undocumented roadside stop, every little pull-off that didn't exist on my route sheet, it would reset to the exact same bad time. 2:17. Not 2:16. Not 2:18. Always 2:17. You'd restart the electrical, it'd blink, come back, and there it was again like it had someplace else it wanted to be. I know that detail sounds silly, but that's how bad work gets under your skin. Not through one giant revelation, through 100 tiny things you cannot quite file away. The next big one came at an abandoned way station. Dispatch told me to pull over there after midnight for an added pickup. I argued. Said it wasn't a listed stop and I had paying passengers already on board. They said contract override and told me not to make them repeat themselves. So I pulled over. 3 people boarded. Silent, no luggage, no receipts I could see. One of the younger yard employees had ridden up front from El Paso to reposition the bus after shift change the next day. Kid couldn't have been more than 19. He came up beside me while those passengers were settling in and said, without looking at me, "Don't look in the rear compartment," which obviously meant I was going to look in the rear compartment. Not right then. I waited. Drove another hour. Parked at a fuel yard with enough sodium light to make everything look diseased. Popped the hatch. There were bags back there that didn't belong to anybody on my manifest. Personal bags, not freight. Duffels with cheap luggage tags. A plastic grocery sack tied shut around toiletries. A little roller case with a cartoon charm on the zipper. Names on the tags I recognized because I had seen versions of them on previous manifests. Not 1 or 2. Enough that my stomach went loose all at once, and still, I drove the rest of that run. That's the worst part to explain, and I don't think I can explain it in a way that makes me look any better than I deserve. I didn't keep driving because I thought it was fine. I kept driving because by then I understood enough to be afraid, and not enough to know who was safe to tell. Driver at my age, broke, bad credit, one company willing to keep me on. And I had already spent months obeying orders I knew were dirty around the edges. Once you've agreed to the smaller wrong thing often enough, the bigger wrong thing doesn't arrive as a shock. It arrives as the next instruction. I started copying manifests after that, quietly. Old school, carbon copies, phone pictures, whatever I could get. I slipped them into the back of my binder behind those letters I'd never mailed. I listened more closely when dispatch changed names after departure. I wrote down dates, times, the same surname cycling through, the same stops being added and then erased. Eventually, I got assigned another night north and recognized one of the bags in the rear compartment before I even opened it because of a strip of green tape wrapped around the handle. Inside that compartment, tucked behind the luggage, was a cardboard tray full of prepaid burner phones. Each one had a piece of masking tape on it. Each piece of tape had a passenger name. Some of the names I had carried, some I had only seen on manifests. I picked up one phone and the screen lit. Missed calls, voicemails, message previews from numbers saved as Mama, Primo, Home, Tia Rosa. Where are you? Call me. Please answer. We are worried. That was the closest I came to being sick on the job in 30 years of driving. It wasn't dramatic, no big collapse. I just sat on the bumper edge with that phone in my hand and the diesel ticking hot underneath me and realized I had been helping move human beings through a system built for them not to come back out the other end in any normal way. I put everything back exactly where I found it. I copied what I could, took photos when I could do it without flash, drove to Las Cruces on the next run, parked at the terminal, walked inside like I was getting coffee, and never got back on that bus. Through a lawyer, because I was too afraid to do it directly, I handed what I had to investigators. Anonymous at first. Later, less anonymous than I intended. The company dissolved a few months after that. Abruptly. Office shuttered. Phones dead. A couple managers vanished before charges could touch them. Whether that means they were guilty, smart, or just used to disappearing, I couldn't tell you. I drive short regional routes now. Daylight mostly. Mandatory passenger ID scans, cameras that actually work. If somebody changes a manifest after departure, the system stamps it and 10 people get an email. It's still bus work. Coffee still tastes like punishment, but at least the ground under it is visible. I still carry those apology letters in my binder. Not because of my ex-wife anymore, if I'm being honest. I carry them because they remind me that cowardice wasn't some one-time failure on those desert routes. It was practice. I had been rehearsing it for years in smaller rooms. What I never found out was whether that company was the thing itself, or whether we were just one stretch of road inside something a lot bigger. Story 3. This next account isn't about being chased exactly. It's about finding out a place has been wrong for longer than anyone will say. The terminal was attached to a motel in the way a lot of old roadside places are, like somebody kept adding on to a bad idea until it became infrastructure. I was standing behind the ticket counter at a little after 1 in the morning, trying to decide whether the coffee smell was coming from the fresh pot or the carpet cleaner, when I noticed the suitcases behind the lost and found rack had date tags going back almost a decade, and somebody had dusted them recently. Not cleaned exactly. More like sprayed them down with that lemony dusting stuff offices use when they want something to look maintained from across the room. The tags were old enough to curl at the corners. The cases had the kind of wear you only get from bus travel, scuffed wheels, baggage bay grime. One with a strip of duct tape over a crack near the handle, but the shelves around them smelled fresh. I remember thinking that was lazy management in a very specific way. My name's Nadine, and at the time I did temporary terminal coverage for a regional coach company, filling staff shortages, sick leave, maternity leave, all the gaps you only notice in transportation when nobody else wants the shift. I actually liked it. I like temporary places. Always have. Break rooms especially. Maybe that's weird. I used to take Polaroids of every terminal break room I worked in. Not because they were beautiful. Usually the exact opposite. Beige microwaves, corkboards with curling notices, a chair nobody admits is broken until you sit in it. I liked documenting places people passed through and forgot. It made them feel less disposable. Richfield was supposed to be a 2-week assignment. Rural overnight coach terminal, attached motel, buses arriving between midnight and dawn. Then nothing much until morning. Sevier County in winter has a kind of empty cold that makes buildings feel separate from each other even when they're touching. The waiting area had dim fluorescent lights that gave everyone a headache complexion, vending machines that worked selectively based on mood, and an industrial carpet that smelled aggressively cleaned whether anyone had spilled anything or not. Through the thin motel wall behind the office, you could hear the ice machine rumbling on and off like distant thunder with bad timing. Most nights were fine. Slow, but fine. There was one older clerk named Benton Slade who worked the overlap hours and treated the place like it had opinions. Not haunted opinions, just rules he couldn't imagine anyone else not knowing. He'd say things like, "Don't let Coach 31 sit after pickup, or you don't want to delay the westbound once it's loaded." The phrase he used was always after pickup, never after boarding, never after departure, after pickup. I thought it was terminal superstition. Every transport job has some version of that. Truckers who won't top off on certain nights. Train people who say a route feels off. Airline ground crews who develop vendettas against gates. Benton just had the motel terminal flavor of it. He also referred to some passengers by seat number instead of name. Not everybody, just certain ones. He'd glance at a manifest and say seat 12 is late or seat 23 still hasn't checked in. I assumed he was old school and bad with names until I realized he did know plenty of names, just not those. Again, I had explanations ready for all of it, because that's what normal people do. If your first instinct in every workplace is secret room full of evidence, you're not going to last long anywhere. One of the first nights, a stranded passenger asked me for help locating luggage that hadn't come off an overnight coach. Simple request. I went into archive storage to check older logs and found gaps. Not random gaps, whole chunks of passenger records missing, and only from specific overnight routes passing through during the same narrow window of years. I asked Benton if those had been moved. He got defensive so fast it almost would have been funny if it hadn't felt so rehearsed. Said there'd been a flood years earlier. Records destroyed. Corporate knew all about it. He said it while standing in front of a shelf that still had water-stained binders from the supposed flood, which on its own wasn't strange. What was strange was the old surveillance monitor above the cabinet still displaying dates and timestamps from some of those same missing nights. The monitor system cycled camera feeds in grayscale with a digital stamp in the corner. If the nights were gone from the logs, why was the monitor archive still aware they existed? I asked Benton that. He told me not to go digging through systems I didn't understand. That put my back up a little. Not enough to leave, enough to start paying attention. The vending machine started giving me expired peanut butter crackers with manufacturing dates from the current month. I know that sounds tiny, but it kept happening. Best by last year, made 3 weeks ago. Same with a soda bottle that had a fresh cap ring and syrup that tasted flat and old. The terminal felt like it had been arranged by somebody who understood categories but not sequence. I called regional about the missing logs, and to my irritation they confirmed a flood had damaged record storage years back. That explanation should have settled me, and for maybe a few hours it did. I remember feeling almost embarrassed, like I'd let a sleepy rural shift turn me into a conspiracy person. Then I found motel room keys attached to some of the abandoned suitcases behind the counter. Old brass tag fobs, not keycards. Rooms from the demolished wing behind the terminal, the one everyone said had been condemned and closed for years. The room numbers were still stamped into the tags. 214. 218, 221. Rooms that, according to Benton and the maintenance guy, didn't exist in any usable sense anymore. I held one up and asked Benton why lost luggage from bus passengers had keys to condemned motel rooms clipped to them. He looked at the key and said sometimes staff reused tags. It was such a bad answer I almost laughed. The snowstorm night is when I should have left. We had delays stacking up eastbound, and one coach held over long enough that I had hours to kill between arrivals. Benton was in a side office making calls in that low, irritated voice older men use when they think walls are more loyal than people. I had the keys in my pocket, my phone charged, and curiosity doing what curiosity does when it gets too much room. The closed wing was accessed through a service hall off the motel laundry room, not hidden, just closed with one of those cheap metal bars and a sign that said unsafe area. The air changed the second I got past the door. Colder, dustier, but not abandoned dusty. Not untouched. It smelled faintly of detergent and stale heat, like a place that had been aired out badly rather than sealed. The hallway lights didn't all work, but enough did. Some rooms were empty except for stripped mattresses and old curtains. Some had luggage, not piled up, placed. That's the part I still come back to. Neatly arranged, as if guests had stepped out for ice or a smoke and meant to return in 10 minutes. A duffel on a chair. Folded jeans at the foot of a bed. Bus tickets on nightstands. A paperback face down, spine cracked in the middle. In one room there was a styrofoam cup on the sink with the straw still in it, dry and brittle but standing upright. If you've spent time in hotels or terminals, you know the difference between abandoned and interrupted. This felt interrupted. I went room to room taking pictures because by then I had crossed from suspicious to committed in the dumbest possible way. Anybody sensible would have left and called police from the parking lot. I kept going because I wanted the pattern to reveal itself if I just saw one more thing. That's not bravery. That's nosiness with a jacket on. Room 214 had the Polaroids, pinned to a corkboard over the desk, dozens of them. Passengers asleep on buses, heads against windows, mouths open under travel neck pillows. Someone curled around a backpack, someone in a station chair with their coat over their face. The angle was always intimate in a way that made my skin feel wrong, taken from too near, from inside the space where sleeping strangers assume they are unobserved. There was one of me. I was in the driver's lounge on my first overnight shift there, asleep for maybe 20 minutes in the ugly vinyl recliner by the vending machines. I had my arms crossed over my coat and my head tipped back. I remember that nap because the ice machine had kept kicking on and waking me in fragments. Seeing yourself asleep in a picture you did not know was taken does something odd to your body. Mine went hot first. Then my fingers stopped working right and I nearly dropped the phone. I almost convinced myself that was the worst of it. That maybe Benton was a creep with a camera and a filing problem and the rest was just old property nobody had cleared. That was the false little landing my brain built for itself because the alternative had too many rooms attached to it. Then I looked lower on the board. My photo had handwriting beneath it, still asking questions. Those were the words, not old faded marker from years ago, fresh enough to read without leaning in. Beneath that were older Polaroids with dates spanning back farther than the condemned wing was supposed to have been accessible at all. Men, women, different clothes, different buses, same sleeping slackness, same sense that whoever took the pictures had time. I don't remember backing out of the room. I remember the hallway seeming longer than before and the ice machine on the other side of the wall thumping on at exactly the wrong moment and making me bite down hard enough to hurt a tooth. I remember Benton saying my name from somewhere behind me in the service corridor, not shouting, just saying it once like he already knew where I was going to stop. I didn't stop. I went straight to the office, copied what terminal records I could onto a flash drive I had in my bag, took the key tags, grabbed my coat, and walked out before dawn. Not at shift end. Not with an excuse. Just left. Drove east until the sun came up enough to make the rest area parking lot look real again. Then called regional and resigned. 2 days later I got a call saying the motel wing had burned in an accidental electrical fire before investigators could inspect it fully. Of course it did. I gave statements, turned over the photos I had, handed over the flash drive copy of what I'd pulled from the terminal systems. I was asked versions of the same questions for months, most of which came down to whether I could prove the wing had been actively used or only maintained. I could prove it felt used. I could prove the rooms were arranged. I could prove someone took photographs of sleeping passengers, including me. The rest sat in that muddy space where institutions go to die slowly. I stopped taking break room Polaroids after Richfield. Just stopped. Whole hobby vanished. Temporary places don't feel harmless to me anymore, which sounds dramatic, but I don't mean it dramatically. I mean I can no longer stand in a windowless employee room with a humming fridge and think this is just a forgotten little nowhere. Now I think about who keeps it this way and for whom. I still have the flash drive in a fireproof safe. Haven't opened it again. People always ask why not. I don't have a good answer that makes me sound tough. I think part of me believes that as long as it's closed, everything on it is still exactly what I saw, and not something worse. What I never figured out was why rooms in a condemned wing, officially unused for years, still looked like somebody expected people back before morning. Story 4. The last story in this video is the one I understand the least, and I was there for all of it. Don't open it. That was the first thing anybody said, and she whispered it from somewhere near the back while I was crouched behind the steering column trying to make myself smaller than a bus driver can really get. Whoever was outside kept pounding on the side of the coach with an open hand, then a fist, then something harder. Not on the door at first, on the metal just behind me, right where the route number was posted in the side window. Bang, 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 then my route number shouted like they were trying to prove they belonged there. The whole bus shook a little every time they hit it. I had one hand on the door control and one on my phone, and I could hear my own baseball game leaking tinny and stupid through the earbud I'd yanked halfway out. Old cassette recording, Cleveland game from the 80s. The kind of thing I played in one ear on overnight routes because silence on an empty bus made my brain start inventing company. That night, all it was doing was making the noise outside harder to sort. A man near the rear said, "Call 911. Somebody else said they're gonna break the glass. And the woman everybody was there for sat 3 rows behind me with both hands tucked under her arms, saying nothing at all. This was near the end of the route, out past the industrial stretch and the empty transfer points where the cameras don't pick back up until you loop toward the terminal. Wet pavement, sodium streetlights. One van angled crooked across part of the lane ahead. I'd already locked the doors. I just hadn't decided yet whether locking them meant I was protecting my passengers or trapping one of them. That was the part eating me alive. 3 nights earlier, none of it looked like much. I was 23, still pretty new to late-night commuter work in Cuyahoga County, running one of those mostly empty routes between downtown Cleveland and the outer suburbs, where after midnight the city sort of comes apart into industrial blocks, shuttered plazas, transfer shelters with one flickering ad panel, and long stretches where it feels like you're driving through the back hallway of somewhere bigger. The bus always smelled like wet pavement people dragged in on their shoes, stale cigarette smoke sneaking through cracked windows at the stops, and overheated electronics from the dashboard console because one of the internal fans whined when it got tired. Add the suspension rattling over potholes and you had basically the soundtrack of me trying not to think too hard. I wore one earbud sometimes, quiet enough I could still hear the bus, or so I told myself. Old baseball broadcasts off cassette transfers my uncle made. Something about announcers talking steadily about a game already decided kept me calmer than music did. Yes, I know how that sounds now. The woman first got on downtown around the Theater District stop where we mostly picked up hospital workers, service staff, and people who looked like they'd missed the life they meant to be on. She wore a dark coat, gray hoodie, jeans, flat shoes, and carried a big brown purse. Not memorable, except the next night she got on again wearing what looked like the exact same clothes but with a black purse, and the third night it was the same coat and hoodie with a red tote bag folded under one arm. Maybe not the exact same clothes. That's what I told myself. People have 2 gray hoodies. People repeat outfits. Women own more than one bag. There. Solved. She started asking me questions on night 2. How often do they switch buses on this route? Do the cameras record the whole time or just certain sections? If a bus breaks down, do passengers wait with the driver or get moved right away? Nothing illegal about those questions. Strange, maybe. But she asked them in this flat, exhausted voice that made her seem more like somebody anxious from work than anything else. Like maybe she'd had a weird incident one night and was trying to understand how the system worked. I answered casually. I was young enough then to think calm answers made me observant. What I did notice was other passengers didn't look at her. I don't mean they ignored her in the normal city way. I mean when she boarded, people who had been half asleep suddenly found the floor fascinating. One guy physically shifted one seat over without making eye contact. A woman up front got off 2 stops early the first night the regular rider got on, and when I asked if she'd meant to, she just said yep too fast and hurried away. Now you can build a whole scary story out of other people's weird reactions if you want to. I didn't. I figured maybe she had history with someone on the route. Maybe she'd argued with people before. Maybe I was connecting dots that weren't there. Because overnight work makes you narrate your own surroundings like an idiot. Then came the stop by the abandoned grocery plaza. Nobody boards there after midnight. Nobody. The store had been closed long enough for saplings to start crowding the loading dock fence. She rang for the stop, got off by herself and stood under the busted light with the red tote bag while I pulled away. Maybe 2 minutes later, farther up the road, 3 men stepped off the curb waving both arms. One of them pointed back toward the plaza and shouted that a woman had left her phone on the bus. Company policy is simple on unscheduled stops. If they're not at a marked location and not in direct distress in a way you can verify, you do not open. So I slowed, checked mirrors, and kept the doors shut. That's when my baseball broadcast cut into static. Not gradual fuzz. Just gone. Dead air in one ear right as the men spread out a little instead of staying together. One moved toward the curbside, one toward the lane. It was probably just the tape file on my phone glitching. That's all. Still, the sudden silence made every sound on the bus seem closer. I told them through the cracked driver's window that they had to contact Transit Lost and Found. One of them slapped the side of the bus and said, "Just open up, man." I drove on. My hands felt slick on the wheel after that, and I kept wiping them on my pants at red lights. I also took the earbud out completely, which should have told me I understood more than I was admitting. The next night she boarded again downtown. Same coat. Fresh bruise along the jawline, yellowing at the edge. Different bag, small this time, navy blue with a broken zipper pull. She tapped her fare, met my eyes for maybe the first real time, and said, "If anyone asks, I wasn't here yesterday." I actually laughed a little, not because it was funny, more because when somebody says something that direct your brain wants to make it normal by force. I asked if she was all right. She said, "Drive the route." That answer sat with me the whole night. Passengers got on and off. Rain started. The windshield kept catching that oily glare you get from streetlights on wet glass. Then dispatch sent a message to my console asking me to confirm whether a female passenger matching a certain vague description had boarded my bus from downtown. That does not happen. Dispatch cares about delays, breakdowns, fights, medical issues, wheelchairs, missed transfers. They do not send out all points bulletins for one rider unless police are involved, and if police are involved, the message usually says so. I asked who was requesting. They replied, "Just confirm." I looked in the mirror at her. She was sitting 2/3 back on the driver's side, staring at the reflection instead of out the window. I did not confirm. Part of me thought maybe I was helping her. Part of me thought maybe I was being manipulated by somebody who'd figured out I was young and eager to feel useful. Both ideas rode together from then on, and they never really got sorted out. That same route the next night is the one that opened this story. Near the end, before the camera zone comes back on, I saw the van ahead angled wrong across the lane. Not fully blocking it, just enough that I had to slow. Then the pounding started from outside before I had even come to a full stop. Route number shouted, door handle yanked, palm on the glass. Another hit on the side panel. The woman in the back didn't move. I looked at her and she looked back like this had happened before and she was tired of being the reason. One of the men outside yelled that she needed to come out now, said it like a demand he was used to having obeyed. Another kept saying she had stolen something. Then the first one changed it to family emergency. Then it was, come on, we're just trying to get her home. None of those stories matched long enough to help them. But here's the moral part I don't get to hide from. For a few seconds I hesitated. Really hesitated. Because what if they were right enough? What if she had done something dangerous? What if she was having some kind of break and I was sealing her into a bus with strangers who hadn't signed up for this? What if the back whisper telling me don't open it was fear talking, not wisdom? I had all of that in my head while my thumb hovered over the door control. Then I saw the passengers. A guy in a work jacket had his phone up already with emergency dispatch on speaker. The older woman who'd whispered not to open it looked more angry than scared, which weirdly helped me. Anger reads clearer than panic. And the woman herself, the one all this was about, gave the smallest shake of her head I've ever seen. So I locked the doors fully and killed the interior lights. That made the outside men mad in a real way. One came right up to the windshield, and that's when I saw the photo. He had a printed photo of the woman in his hand. Not a phone screen. Printed. He slapped it against the glass like he was serving a warrant. In the picture, she was seated on my bus exactly where she was sitting then. Same bruise, same blue bag on her lap. The timestamp printed in the corner was from minutes earlier. I felt my stomach drop in this ugly cold way, because there are only so many ways somebody gets a picture like that fast. Camera feed access, someone on board, someone following, some kind of coordinated handoff, none of them good. I checked the interior mirror so hard I nearly climbed out of the seat doing it. Everybody still seemed to be where they'd been. But suddenly every passenger was suspect to me. The man in the hoodie pretending to nap, the woman with the grocery bag, the quiet guy near the back door. Anybody could have sent it. Anybody could have been watching her for them. Once that thought got in, it ate everything else. The passengers started calling 911 themselves. Multiple phones, multiple voices. One man outside heard that and backed toward the van. Another pounded once more on the door and shouted my route number again like the bus itself might cave if he named it right. Then somebody down the street lit them up with blue, not dramatic movie timing. Just police finally arriving because enough terrified riders had called with the same location. The van peeled out before the cruiser fully blocked it. One officer stayed with us, another went after the van. I kept the doors shut until the officer was at my window and identified himself twice. After that, it turned into statements and wet pavement and people talking over each other at the terminal while adrenaline made everyone sound either too loud or too calm. Police took my console logs, asked about the dispatch requests, asked if I knew the woman. I didn't. She gave a name. Whether it was hers, I have no idea. They separated her from the rest of us pretty quickly, which maybe was for her safety, maybe for ours, maybe because nobody knew what category the night belonged in. The van got away before identification. Maybe they found it later. They didn't tell me. Transit told me I'd done the right thing keeping the doors closed. Transit also reminded me in the same breath that personal audio devices were against best practice while driving, which, fair enough. I don't wear the earbud anymore. Haven't since. I miss the dumb comfort of those old baseball broadcasts, but not enough to wonder what I failed to hear while a whole situation was forming around me. I also check my mirrors constantly now whenever anybody asks for an unscheduled stop after midnight, to the point where one of the older drivers jokes I'm trying to count ghosts. Real funny, Jim. And here's the part I can't fit anywhere useful. About 2 months after all that, I was deadheading downtown after my shift and saw her board another late-night bus across the terminal lane. Same woman. I am sure of it. Same face. Same way of holding her shoulders slightly forward like she expected cold even indoors. She looked right at me and acted like she'd never seen me before.